And in which case, good morning, everybody. And, well, thanks so much for joining me here. It is amazing to be back at in-person conferences and actually seeing people again, because normally I just see the camera that we have at the back of the room and just have to assume that everybody can actually see me. And, well, the positive thing about that, I just assume everybody's smiling when I do it to a camera. Now I can actually see your faces and see how it goes. So I want to talk to you about making mistakes today. And it comes from the journey that we had at a previous employer where we were really late to the CI/CD party. We did have a release flow. It did work for us. It got the site to production reasonably okay most of the time. We went live twice a week, which was still quite impressive compared to other companies that I knew. And it gave us a flexibility that when we needed a hot fix, we could get it out there in an hour or two. It wasn't bad. But it was also really cumbersome. There was a huge amount of manual effort involved in getting our website from our source control and into production. We had a little bit of automation in there, but it was basically just PowerShell scripts. And if somebody didn't run it at the right time, everything went horribly, horribly wrong. It was really fault intolerant when you made a mistake. And the biggest issue with it was almost none of our developers actually knew what happened to get our code out of source control and into production. There were 2 or 3 people out of a department of 30 that could do this. For everybody else, it was just, I put it in source control, and 2 days later, it's on the website. What more do I need to know? It was out of date. We had a discussion as developers, and we decided that we wanted to work in a more modern way than this. We wanted to know not only that we're building the right things, but also that we're building them the right way. And so we decided we needed to change this. So we put a lot of time, effort, sweat, tears, and of course money into trying to move our pipeline forward. We did this for 12 months, and so after that we were doing CI/CD. No, really, really not, because like many companies, that only put us at the start of our journey. And we also made the mistake that quite a lot of companies also make, and that is we looked way too much at tooling and what we needed to do to make the tools do what we wanted to do, and not enough time actually looking at the people using them and helping them change. Because that is really, really hard to do. Smoking kills. People still smoke. It doesn't change many people's ideas about what they do there. Drinking alcohol is not necessarily healthy. People still like a drink. Motorbikes are maybe the most dangerous standard form of transport that we have, and I adore riding bikes, much to my mum's disappointment. When we involve people, things take longer than we want. That pace of change can seem glacially slow. And when you're the person trying to push it, you're there, you're running, you're ready to go. And other people, they're still trying to find their feet and stand up. And yet more people at the back, they've got their heels in the ground, they are trying to slow you down. They don't want to change at all. So I'm going to take you on the journey of some of the mistakes that I made, some of the things that happened in our teams, and what we learned along the way. What I don't have today is any solutions. Sorry about that. But I don't believe there are any magic solutions that I can give you, because I don't think there is a single solution to each problem that we have. Inside of a company, a department, a team, you're going to have different personality traits and people reacting in different ways. And when you come across these problems, you're going to have to find the tailored way that works for you. But take a look at the mistakes that I've made, and then go away and make your own new ones. Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore. I am Tech Explorer DevOps for Omniplan based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I've been writing code since the middle of the 1990s, and for the last 2 years, I've been honored to call myself a Microsoft MVP. So yeah, I apologize, I'm interloping on a PHP conference here. The previous company I worked for, I was there for a long time, 14 years. When I started back in 2006, I helped implement the first release flow that we had. Because previously to that, it was literally developers taking ASP pages off of production, changing them, putting them back and checking that they worked, which isn't the best way to work. I was really proud of what we did, but I was even prouder that just before I left, I was part of the team that helped kill that process and replace it with something that worked so much better. Now I'm going to go over 3 stories today and look at just some different aspects that we did. So my first story, learning from mistakes. Or more accurately, oh crap, something's gone wrong. And even more accurately, how I just kept on making mistakes until I found something that worked. In our website, one of the products that we had was what you call in Holland an execution-only mortgage. And that is for customers who know enough about the process to actually get their own mortgages without taking on a financial advisor and a mortgage advisor. We had a problem on the website. We had just a few requests that weren't making it through to the back office. Customer clicked the button, but they never appeared. And that's a little bit of a problem, of course. Thankfully, we knew how to solve this problem because we'd anticipated this might happen at some point, so we had multiple ways of communicating these messages. But it meant our back office, who were also busy trying to improve their own work, suddenly had all of this extra manual work that they had to do to take this outside data and get it into their system. We managed to fix the problem really quickly. It was 2 lines of code, a really simple fix. Hotfixed it to production, got everything working. And then we sat back and thought, well, how did this happen? What do we do so that we don't have this in the future? Because we need to stop giving people extra work. We'd done postmortems in the past, but they never worked for us. Anytime we did a postmortem, 2 things happened. One, you sat around blaming each other, and you never got anywhere. Or you didn't blame each other and you just said, we need to test more. If we test more, this isn't going to happen. And everybody leaves. But I've seen online from some companies, if you do it right, if you go in there with the open mind and dig deeper, you can actually get useful information out of this. So I decided to do a little experiment myself and just try and dig in myself and figure out what went wrong. And the first thing that I noticed is that we had a really complicated use case. As you can imagine, closing a mortgage can be quite complex. There's a lot of data that we need, but we managed to find defaults that worked for like 90% of people. And so that was our happy flow, the click, 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 click. It works, we can go home. This was not that. The users were putting all sorts of stuff that we weren't expecting. Totally valid, but we weren't expecting it. Although the website was failing, the problem was something unexpected was coming in the data and it was marked as suspicious, and that's why it didn't make it to the back end. Nothing on the website told us this because we didn't want to annoy our customers. We wanted to check it ourselves, let them think everything's fine, and we will solve it and contact them. But it also meant that we didn't know, unless we checked databases, secondary systems, back office, whether or not our code was doing what we wanted it to do. And when you put all of that complexity together and the fact that we didn't have any automatic checks at that time, it came down to the fact that when the developer made a change, they didn't check everything. They did the happy flow, it seemed to work, and everybody went forward. So did the tester. So did the product owner. Locally, development, test, acceptation environments, everywhere, this was just missed because we were just sticking to the easy flow. So we have our answer. If we test more, we can find all of our problems. If developers test everything, if the testers test everything, if the product owners test everything, for every single change that we make, nothing can slip through the cracks in the future, which is obviously pointless. That's not going to happen. For one thing, we can't do this for every single change that we make. People aren't good at this type of repetitive task. If you've got to do 10 checks every time you make a change, you're going to miss steps. You're going to forget to type things in. You don't have 48 hours a day to do this for every single change that you're doing. It's just not possible. So just saying, how did this happen? It didn't really help me move forward. So I went back and I changed it just a little bit. What are the things that we can do, looking from a different angle, to stop it happening again? Not much of a change, but it really helped my head change to a different angle and look at it in a different way. The first thing that sprung out at me, of course, is we would have to check this manually every single time. We need to get some automation in here. It's not going to replace the testing, but we can do the checks to make sure things that are easy to check actually work. The other one that we had to do is check that we didn't only cover those quick, no-brainer situations that you can just go click, 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 nothing goes boom, we can move forward. We needed to look at some of these more complex cases. We had user data now, we're live. We can see what people are doing and try and capture some more situations. We also needed to make sure that the site actually told us when something had gone wrong. If something in the site is producing strange results, we shouldn't have to check 2 or 3 systems further to see whether or not something's worked or not. We should be able to get that data immediately. So that gave me something more concrete that I could look at and figure out what I can do to try and stop this happening again. First up, that bug, like I say, it was a 2-liner. It was really easy to catch with unit testing. It was an obvious flaw once you saw it. So some better unit testing, we can capture this at the point where we build the code. Then we're going to make sure that the site actually shows us errors, figure out what we can do there to not annoy the users, but make sure that we get this information back. And we're going to add some testing so that automatically, before we go live, we can run through some of these flows and check things are doing what they're supposed to do. Any one of these is going to give us warning earlier in the system, and hopefully our back office is going to like us for it. Now, I'm a developer, so I started with unit tests because it's something that we knew we needed to add for various reasons that I'm not going to get into because they paid me too much. We didn't have any unit testing at the time. And okay, we know we want to add this. This seems like a good place to start. It wasn't. That code was hideous. It took in a humongous object. And if you didn't have everything right, all of business validations failed, which meant using this would have made some really brittle tests, because if one thing had have changed, all of our unit tests would have needed changing to make it pass. And so we decided what we're going to do is refactor the code so we can just pinpoint what we need to do. I say refactor the code, I'm lying there. We rewrote the code. We split it up into separate classes. We used a strategy pattern to inject the particular validations that we wanted and made sure that we could pinpoint that code that we wanted to test with only the data needed for that test. And then we found a bug. And we thought this was awesome because we found a bug. Users haven't hit this bug yet. We can get this fixed. We're proving that we're using our time responsibly to the management who didn't sign off on all of this extra work. Say, look, we found this before a user. We're awesome. This is the right way to go. It really wasn't, because we still didn't know how to test this code. And so we didn't test this code properly. And I broke production yet again and gave yet more work to the back office that they had to do manually. Have you ever had that sinking feeling when you're really trying to help someone, but what you actually do is just put more work on their plate instead? It was not fun. So, get the hotfix out, fix it properly, and then post-mortem the post-mortem, because I thought I was doing the right thing. I've added unit tests, and we double-checked the unit test. They were correct. So we're testing the right thing. Everything's working as it should be. How did this happen? It turned out I wasn't the first person to discover this bug. A couple of years ago, somebody else had discovered this bug, but instead of fixing it, they changed their code to the output that the bug produced, which meant that when I fixed my code, I broke their code. And yet again, like I say, we didn't know how to test this, so we'd failed to catch it. It made it all the way out to production, and it made us realize that we picked up those 3 things that we wanted to do in entirely the wrong order. We're dealing with legacy code. It doesn't have any code coverage. I'm not going to say low. It didn't have any code coverage. And then we're changing code, not knowing how to test it. So let's reorder the points. First up, let's make the site tell us when something goes wrong, because that's kind of going to be our starting point for moving forward. Then we're going to add some end-to-end tests for the happy flows and some of the complex flows, walk through the site at the end. Our pyramid is upside down, but it's the only thing we can do right now. And then, when we know we can safely make changes to the code, let's start making our code better and getting that triangle the right way up. So we did that. We put something on the site where if you're an internal user, you actually got a validation message at the end of the flow. So us as internal users, which the test account was, you can see, yep, validation's fired here, and if it shouldn't do, we could stop the release and make sure we fixed it. After that, we started working on the end-to-end tests, and then we started refactoring yet more of the back end to make it more resilient and trustworthy for the future. So after that point, even before the code leaves our machines, we know that we're not breaking stuff, which is a lie because we still broke stuff in production, but we got a lot better than we did before. And when we had issues, we made sure the first thing we did was add a regression test for that, and then we actually fixed the problem to catch it in the future. Coming out of that, a few things really hit me. The first one was, always concentrate on what you're doing. Because that first pass, when I was doing all of that rewriting and refactoring, I found that bug. But that bug was a sidetrack. That wasn't my goal at the time, and it wasn't something that users even knew about. It wasn't giving us problems. I should have made a note of that and come back to it later. Because what I actually did is contaminate my rewrite with functionality changes. Testing was still a nightmare. We didn't know how to sort it, and I'm putting it in there. Which led me to a second one of, keep your PRs clean. Because, again, I've contaminated my PR now. I have basically 10 new files in the solution that kind of do the same as before, except for 2 lines. There's no way to easily to compare it with the previous code. I gave the person looking at that code 0 chance to try and spot anything that I'd done which was odd. If first of all I'd have made the PR for the rewrite and then done the bug fix, I'm not going to say it would have happened, but I can give somebody more of a chance of going, hold on, have you thought about what this could impact? And both of these things kind of bring me back to the DevOps Handbook or the Phoenix Project. Awesome books. If you've not read them, I can heartily recommend it. And they talk about picking up work in the right order. Now, that not only goes for me contaminating my changes, but also goes for the order of the changes that I picked up. What was our biggest blocking thing? We didn't know when our website was broken. So that should have been the one that I picked up first. After you've picked up your biggest bottleneck, after you've got rid of the most risk, then you can reevaluate and pick up the second and the third and move forward, always making life easier. So, on to my second story. And this one stems from how people can fall back into old ways of working, and how even when we're trying to help, you don't necessarily do it all the time through no fault of your own. I want to go back to mid-2018, and my department as a whole, which means 2 or 3 people at the top and set it to the rest, decided that we were going to move from our long-lived branches into trunk-based development. This caused so much stress in the department, anger, resentment among some people. And for me, I was in the fear and stress part of it because I saw all of the issues that we had with long-term branches. I saw all of the problems that we introduced when we merged them, and it's like, if we do this on a daily basis, we're going to be doing nothing but firefighting. We're not going to move forward. Thankfully, I realized I'd missed the point. If you go from a long-lived branch and move to trunk-based development and do nothing else, your life is going to be a living hell. It's going to be awful. Because what gives you the benefit is realizing what you need to change and realizing what you need to improve in your processes and your work practices to make the trunk-based development work. That click, it was a complete mindset change for me. I suddenly got so excited looking at everything that we can do, the changes we need to make, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel that isn't a train coming the other way, and hoping how we can improve our lives. I just really wanted to kick this off and get going. My team, still a little bit afraid. They were quite worried about how we can do this, what steps we need to take. Is it even possible? Except for one person. One person, he really put his heels in the ground. This is a mistake. No company in the world would ever dream of doing trunk-based development. It's all a lie. It doesn't happen. The only way I can give you quality is on a long-lived branch. You get rid of that, I can't do this. We are being irresponsible. We are being reckless to our company, our users, and to the finance that we serve. This led to some really interesting retrospectives, because I was at one end and he was at the other, and the poor team sat in the middle listening to us argue for weeks and weeks. I apologize to them now still. But eventually we actually started to have a decent discussion. And I started to listen to his fears, and he started to explain them as fears instead of as being, we're not doing this. And it was really fruitful. I started to see that his point was that he didn't think you could test anything so small because our system wasn't perfect. He did say, if you have a perfect system in a perfect world, then we can do this. But you've got to have full unit test coverage. You've got to have full integration test coverage. You've got to have full end-to-end test coverage. And if you don't have that, you shouldn't even start. We need perfection. I'm a little bit more pragmatic. We had a huge code base. Some of it was a decade or more old, and it worked. It worked, it was performant, we had no reason to change it, and we are not going to be rewriting this just to add unit tests. It was a waste of time, and frankly, it was dangerous. So we couldn't wait for perfection because perfect doesn't exist in the world. I'm sorry. So where can we start? What small things can we do to see how it happens, to see how we can spread it, to slowly build up that coverage and move on? Now, I said in my first story, we didn't have unit tests. By this point, we had some unit tests, and we were adding them on a best effort basis as we went along. I also learned best effort does not work in any way, shape, or form. It sounds awesome, and you're doing what you think you can do, but it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because as soon as a business comes with a priority, a release date, any type of pressure, this best effort that you're doing goes out of the window because now you've got this on your shoulders and you need to move quickly. It wasn't making us better, it was making us worse, just more slowly than we were before. So in order to actually move forward, we decided as a team we were going to stop with best effort, and we were actually going to put it down on paper. From now on, every pull request that we make has to be tested. Whether that is an end-to-end test because the back-end code can't be covered, whether or not that's an integration or a unit test when it can, doesn't matter. We are making tests for everything, including the blast radius of the change that we're making. And that has to be done before you change the code. Our tester was terrified. They saw the work piling up on the front of their desk because they've got to do all of this, and they were actually accurate historically because our test team had a really weird system, and the fact that I don't know what that system was says how open it was. As a developer, I couldn't write tests, I couldn't run tests, couldn't even see the results of tests. All that I got was an email from the tester saying, it failed, you need to change it. Like, cool, what failed? The test. Okay. They also thankfully saw the problem with this. And at this time, serendipitously, they were also changing to a new system. Cypress, JavaScript, TypeScript. It's code. We're developers. We can write code. We like writing code. We can take some of that work from the tester. We can use the tester's head to find out what we need to test, to find out what we need to try and break, and then we can get them to validate our tests afterwards. And rather than piling the work on his desk, we can actually help him and take some work off of his desk. And everybody learns as a result as well. We discussed this. We got our plans put down. We knew what we were going to do. And we went to lunch to relax before our sprint planning. So after lunch, we came back, looked at our stories for the upcoming sprint. We're in the middle of a big change at that time, so we kind of knew what we had to do. Everything was refined. It was, how can we best fit the jigsaw was the biggest question that we had. Only, there's always housekeeping. You might be in the middle of a big change, but what happens when an external API change comes in? And if you don't change now, your site's going to break. Or, as happens frequently in Holland, the government decides to change the rules, and if you don't change your website, then suddenly you're no longer compliant, and you can risk losing your financial accreditation. And we had something like this come in that sprint. Our product owner explained it, and this is really, really important. We have to do this. It's not yet urgent. We've got about 6 weeks before it needs to be in production, so if you can do it, we can tick it off and it's good. If you can't, we can move it, but what do we have? What are you comfortable with? And at this point, one of my colleagues gave a line which still fills me with dread, and it was simply, well, okay, well, to do this for you, we'll just skip the test for this one and we'll just move forward. I was shocked. I wasn't impressed, and I may have used a few choice words to express that disappointment. It's 2 hours. That's all we're talking about here. 2 hours since we'd had a huge discussion about making this change to the way that we worked, to help us make our code changes more reliably, to help us have more trust in our changes, and to help us work in a more fluid way. 2 hours. And we're dropping it. We've not even started, and somebody is suggesting dropping it. And I don't know if it's worse or better, but it's not even because they're lazy. It's not even because they see the complexity in what they're doing. It's just because the business has something and they really want to help the business. But they weren't taken into account that by doing this one quickly, everything else slows down. Because we're now making a change without tests, which means our tester, far from helping us automate the rest of the tests, is manually testing this one change, which means everything else is harder to change, and we can't automate it yet. And so when you try and cut corners like this, it's really short-lived gains. You can cut corners and be ultra quick today. I'm sure we've all seen that. But eventually, unless you take the decision to take the pain of what you've already got there, you are going to slow to a painful crawl as you go through the morass of all the old quick decisions. And when that happens, who's the biggest loser? The business. The very people that this guy was actually trying to help with his idea of let's skip the changes for this one change. And again, 2 hours. He knew why we were doing this. It was fresh in everybody's heads. And it made us realize that weeks, months into the future, if something like this came up, it's not fresh in our heads why we work in a particular way. It's really easy to fall back into what you used to be doing. Now, I do want to stress, because I do feel sorry for the guy that I always use him as an example here, and I did check with him first, but he did totally the wrong thing. But he did do it totally for the right reason. He was coming from a good place. Thankfully, our product owner was spectacularly awesome. She is, without a doubt, the best product owner I've ever worked for, and I miss not working with her anymore. she had a very long-term view on what we were doing. And she said, yeah, what you're doing, it's going to slow everything down. It's going to cost me in the coming months whilst you get up to speed with the new ways of working, the new tools, the new syntax, getting used to all of these new ideas whilst we're still making code changes. And I accept that. So no, we're not cutting corners. You're going to do this right. We can do this next sprint. We'll plan it in properly. Hopefully, as we go on, and we get better coverage, and we get more faith in what we're putting into the world, we can reverse this. We've got our knowledge of how to do everything. We know that our code is tested now. We can not have weeks' worth of manual regression testing every time we do something. Hey, who knows? Maybe this is going to be good in the future, but right now we're just concentrating on learning. It's fine. We actually got feedback on that way earlier than we were expecting to. And it was from that team member that had his foot hard in the sand about not making any changes because it was too dangerous. At the heart of our mortgage software, we had a super complex piece of code. And it was complicated in what it did. It was working out the maximum mortgage you could have. And the rules behind that are rules that only governments can come up with because they made no sense, and you had to take like 10 inputs and get 10 outputs and then mash other stuff together to make this work. It was a nightmare. And changing this was always horrible. In fact, we did our best not to. If we could not change this code, we didn't change this code. One day we had to. We're in the stand-up in the morning, and the product owner says something that's happening, and this guy with his heels in the ground, he gave us all a really stern look. Now, does this mean that we've got to change that algorithm? And we all kind of like a little bit took out and looked at the ground. Yeah, it really does. We can't get around it this time. Okay, as long as there's automatic chest pass, we're fine. We've got this one covered. I still get goosebumps when I say that, because that was just such an awesome part of my career to date, of having someone, A, turn so 180 degrees in his idea about change, and B, getting to the point where we could actually make these changes without spending weeks' worth of testing, with a lot better feeling about the change that we're making as well. It didn't scare us to push this to production anymore. Even with the manual testing, we got scared to push this to production. It's not good. We still had issues. But this whole episode really taught us that it's okay to slow down occasionally and look more to the future than just trying to constantly worry about providing value now and giving yourself more problems that you've got to pay back in the future. So, my last story. Explosion. This is about dealing with changes outside of my team, with trying to see what quick wins we could get for the company, and also dealing with people at every layer of the company. Now, right at the start, I said we're trying to improve our pipeline by using those automatic checks that we'd made, but it wasn't just about making sure our code worked. We also had all of the other complications of getting into production, the actual deployment pipeline, checking SQL changes were working as expected, all sorts of ancillary things. And we formed a CI task force, as our management called it, to help us do this. Problem is, again, it was best effort. And we are all still in a team. We had to do this outside of our normal work. And we're getting pressure from the team and pressure from the product owner, and they're getting pressure from their boss. And we're getting pressure from the CI/CD team. And I'm afraid CI/CD kind of lost. It's features, features, features. Apparently management loved that. The other thing we noticed is we were trying to make lots of small changes across the board. And it made it really opaque as to what was happening. We're putting all of this supposed effort in, and nobody's really seeing any benefit. So after about 9 months, I think, a few of us got together and thought, you know what? We want to show the world what we're doing. We want to be able to shout about this and not just say words that are meaningless to anybody except for the 1 or 2 developers that are involved in it. We took a look at our actual release flow, and we actually figured out with a little bit of effort, we could get 95% of our releases to production automatically without any involvement, except for making sure it worked. And with a little bit more effort, we can mitigate that last 5%. It wasn't going to happen too often per year. We can do this. So we spent an afternoon together trying to figure out what we wanted to change. We spent another afternoon making a pretty PowerPoint because we had to convince management to let us spend time on this. And then it went wrong. And it went wrong before we'd discussed the PowerPoint, before we'd sent it out. To be honest, before we even knew that people knew we were working on this PowerPoint, somebody heard about it. And we got a message back. The business is not going to accept any more releases. Stop what you're doing. It's a waste of time. One of the guys I was working with, he was really courteous. He was like, that's really disappointing. I'm not that courteous a person. I got really frustrated. I was less than impressed. I started writing an email to my boss why this is a bad idea, why we need to continue down this path. And I figured out fairly quickly, you know what, this is a rant. This isn't a constructive email. So I double-checked. I'm only sending it to my boss and the people involved in the team. And I thought, well, you know what, I can get away with this. I'm going to wrap it in rant tags because it's helping me vent at least. And I'm going to end it in 3 achievable points at the end. I thought putting those achievable points on the end mitigated me ranting. My boss kind of disagreed. I apologize, Cindy. My colleagues, on the other hand, they were reading this email, and it actually allowed them to vent as well. And we spent a few hours after this episode drinking coffee, complaining to each other, and working our way through our disappointment. Now, drinking coffee and complaining is awesome because we're humans and it works. Doesn't really solve anything on its own. But when we got rid of the frustration, we are still chock full of adrenaline and energy. And we actually took that and started to think how we can turn this around. What can our next steps be? We're not actually going to accept that we need to stop. We're going to figure out what we need to do next. We started speaking to the business directly, which we should really have done right at the start, and I would recommend it for anybody to make sure you speak to the right people. And it turns out the business didn't actually say, we're not going to accept any more releases, you've got to stop. What the business actually said was, we don't feel we can do daily releases with this right now because we have so much repeated testing. We block out half a day, twice a week to make sure that the releases are safe. And we would rather know that we have lost that half a day than have it spread out across the entire week. So if you can help us with this, we desperately want more releases. It would be awesome if we can think of a quick feature and have it live in a day or two. That's just a goldmine for us, and also really allows us to experiment with our customers. This is great information. Why couldn't I have got this in the first email? Because it's a bottleneck that we can see and understand. It's tangible. We can get our teeth into it. Disappointment's completely gone at this point. My brain has kicked into gear. I am ready to take on this challenge. And just like with moving to Trunkbased development, I just want to see what we can do to make this happen. How can we change our process to not only reduce the burden on our product owners, but also to remove them as a bottleneck for us as developers to do what we want to do? And after some thinking and after some false starts with some thought experiments, figured out the only thing that we can really do is just not have them in the release flow at all. That's the only way we can make this work and guarantee we're not going to interrupt them. So I can't do this with the entire company because that's too much of a change with too much resistance from certain people, and it's complex. And I don't want to deal with that right now because we need to be able to do this quickly. We need to be able to move. I can do it with my small team. They were getting more and more open for experiments, and this was quite an in-your-face experiment, but everybody actually got behind it relatively quickly. So we tried to figure out how can we make sure everything's still working And how can we provide a paper trail for our auditors? Because our auditors were really big on, do you know what has gone into production and who in the business has signed it off? And, okay, well, number one, we're starting our better automation testing. We are starting to make sure that we are covering our blast radius and the things that we need to do. So actually, in the release flow, we know if something's working or not. So what we need to do is to get the product owner out of there and bring them into our teams. Let them know that things are working before we even start our release flow. And we actually brought the PO to our developer machines. And when we're developing, we got her to sit with us and we showed her what we were making. And we gave feedback right at the start instead of further along the chain. And that had even better influence than we were expecting, because all of a sudden, she's not looking on 6 different environments. Do I have this yellow button on the screen, which is what I want to see? She's actually now playing with this button and going, either, awesome, this solves the problem that I wanted to solve, or it's just what I asked for, but actually now that I play with it, it's not what I want. Can we do something different? What can we change here? She could really focus on making our application better. And to get the audit trail, we actually decided that for real functionality changes that the auditors were going to be really hot about when it came to our yearly audit, we actually got her to approve our pull requests. Because then we could just deliver all of our pull requests to the auditors instead of delivering a load of paperwork. And I'd say, look, this is literally the code that we've put to production, and here's our product owner saying, I want this code to go. And here's all the automated checks to prove that it actually works as expected. And it had a really interesting side effect. And that was the product owner knew if it worked or failed. Before we got to production, before she tested anywhere, she knew. The tester also knew. They didn't need to look at these automatic checks. They happened, they knew. And the developers, and we were all involved in the releases and all lost like half a day, twice a week, organizing this. Now nobody has to do this because the process kind of works. And that meant that as developers, we could concentrate on what we were doing today, as long as the test didn't fail. We didn't have to context switch back to what we were doing yesterday or the day before and interrupt our own flow. We could just carry on moving forward. It meant that our testers, rather than checking this yellow button is on the screen, could actually do real exploratory testing and actually really make sure that the app was working in the way that we intended, and could spend more time figuring out how to help the developers write their own tests and, again, move us all forward. And our product owner could spend the time making our already awesome project even better without losing her time. Now, we did this, and it worked really well. Got to say, moving it into different teams was really hard because some people, even if you give them proof, don't believe that it's actually working. That led to some interesting discussions. But within the team, we actually figured out quite quickly that we could get to production in 20 minutes if we did this properly. And it really helped our flow in the future. I often ask myself whether or not that Rant email was a professionally good thing to do. And honestly, I don't know, possibly not, but I'm human and I did it, and it really helped me. And by making sure that I sent it to people who would see what it was for what it was, I actually let them vent their frustration as well. And like I said, the fact that we could then take all of our adrenaline and we could pour that raw energy into finding solutions, as opposed to having that raw energy sitting and festering and just annoying us for the next month, really making us feel bad, actually allowed us to move forward even though this had happened. If you're in this position, find something to help you use that energy for positive, because otherwise it's nasty. So that's my 3 stories. And over the arc of the 3 stories, there were things that kind of came out that made me think about how I approached my own experiments and how I tried to get my team and my department also involved in doing things. For me, it took me a while to figure out that I could actually do this, that I could spend time on it without asking explicit permission and see what I could do. And I started by doing just little tiny experiments just by myself, just for myself, seeing what I could do to help my own workflow. And then as it grew a little bit bigger, see where the low-hanging fruit was. What can I do to make somebody else's life a little bit better? And when it breaks, because if you're doing this, it's going to break. You're going to make mistakes. I hope you don't take down production twice as I did, but you're going to make mistakes. I figured out that the important thing was not to get discouraged by the mistakes that you're making and to just take the step back and learn from them, to figure out what you can change instead in order to move forward, and just repeat that cycle until you find something which really works and makes people's lives better. It's what we do as software developers. And then I wanted to share it. It was like, I was getting so much energy from this, and I wanted to help other people do it. So I started to give 5-10-minute lightning talks in my department meetings. Long before I became a speaker, it was daunting as anything. I did not enjoy the first few times, but it was fun to let people know at least what I've been trying, what was working, what didn't work, and hopefully in that group of 35 people, there's somebody else that kind of goes, that sounds fun. I want to give this a try too. And try and get it to spread naturally, because the one thing you can't do is tell people, you must start experimenting and trying new things, because that's just not going to happen. An important thing here, something I learned fairly quickly, when I'm standing in front of those people and you are trying to explain what makes you tick and what you've been doing, you've got to let your enthusiasm burn so brightly inside you. You've got to let people see that these experiments that you're doing, they kind of give you that knot in the stomach of, cool, we can do something new here. We can try this new process, this new technology. We can do something different and see what it's going to give us. Let them see that every step on your journey is filled with the joy of success. The questions, when there's failure, and yet, just occasionally, the complete and total and utter frustration when it doesn't matter what you do, nothing is working for you. Let people see the gamut of stuff and let them take it on themselves. And I had to realize that not everybody is going to get enthused. Not everybody is going to want to do this. Some people, they are going to fight you tooth and nail at every step of your journey for any change that you want to implement. But the best thing I learned in this process is those people, by and large, they're not doing it because they want to derail what you're doing. They're doing it because they care deeply about what they're doing, and they want to make sure that you're not breaking it for no reason. And when this happens, you really have to listen to other people. And I know it's something I struggle with. And that is, you can listen to somebody and the words go in, but while they're talking, you're already trying to think of a solution, how to get around what they're saying. You don't actually listen to them. But if you can listen to their fears and their frustrations, then you can actually work with them and move forward together. They may see roadblocks, you don't. Some of them aren't going to exist. Some of them are. And I learned more from that colleague that was digging his heels in than I did from anybody who just went along with what I said. One final thing. Not everybody's going to get that knot in their stomach. Some people turn up, do your 8 hours, go home, and that's fine. Just don't get discouraged by it. Don't get frustrated by it, and if you achieve this, please tweet me how you did it. Most importantly, don't let it stop you taking your next journey, your next step for your journey. So, I want to thank you for spending the time with me this morning, listening to my story, like I say, I invite you, take the lessons away that I've learned, go and make your own new mistakes, see what you can break and fix and learn, and then share that with others. I've been Stacy Cashmore. I am so looking forward to the next 2 days. I hope you have an awesome time. Thank you.